Perfect. Well, we are, in that sense, going to get started. Tonight is Get Your First Deal Done. So if you've never done a deal, you're in the right place. This is also the very first class of kind of the reset of NCREG back to the beginning of our teaching cycle. James and I probably have at least 2 years of classes that we could teach in a row, and so we're kind of going back to the beginning. We've done some other fun new stuff this year, like arguably the best class, part 1 and part 2, and some other things that we hadn't done before. But we're kind of going to go back and do the basics from the beginning. So tonight's class is really the class that summarizes the next year of classes, basically. And some of the bullet points are actually classes in and of themselves. Before we get to that, upcoming classes. Webinars, the top 2 are webinars. They're on Tuesday nights. They're only online. We don't meet here. I am teaching Asset Protection 102. Were any of you on Asset Protection last night? Nice. I know you were, and I know you were, obviously. And then, so Asset Protection 102 is going to be examples of documents. So we're going to go through a trust document, a quitclaim deed, an operating agreement, organizational meeting, annual meeting, and some other stuff as well. So if you haven't seen documents for LLCs and asset protection, that is the class for you. And then the following Tuesday on the 17th, James is teaching his favorite Nomad class, Young Professional Nomad Overview, which is?
It's amazing. But Tammy told me that I might not be teaching that. She said that I might be doing the recording of the last one because apparently Timmy has a concert that night.
Oh, yeah. You should get all of NCREG to go.
Sure. Everyone can go.
James's son has a concert. He's in a band, so we should all go there.
We should all go there.
You should take the camera. The webinar should be from the venue.
Me teaching in between songs?
Yeah, no, just that's the concert. And they log on to the webinar. They're like, what is this? It's this is a young professional nomad. He's about to buy his first house. Yes. And then finally, after 7 weeks of teaching in a row or something like that, James is finally going to teach a class on his own again. And he's teaching amazing financing strategies for real estate investors. What is that going to be about? And don't say it's going to be amazing.
It is going to be amazing. It's in the title this time. So it's going to be at how to finance properties, how to do owner-occupant stuff, nothing down, $1,000 down, 1% down, 3% down, 3.5% down, 5% down, and then we're going to do investor loans where we do 15% down, 20% down, 25% down, depending on what you're doing, and some strategies for doing that, and planning, and loan planning, and how to get the best rate. And there'll be some really good stuff in there.
Nice. And then the following week, I also don't have to teach, which is a miracle. It's been at least since April since I didn't teach at least every other week. You're teaching buying process overview. What's that?
So that's basically the checklist for the entire buying process. You'll learn, all the different stages, what you do during each stage. You'll get some of the early on checklists for each one of those, and then we tend to break them down into bigger steps. So the subset of, inspecting a house or dealing with that, you'll have another whole class on. But it's going to give you a big picture for all of it.
Nice. So that's what's coming up. We're going to do introductions. Introduce yourself, just your name and why you're here, and then when are you buying your next buy and hold property? Since this class is about getting your first deal done, what's your date for doing that? And then what's your why for doing real estate? And we'll start back there with Tammy because she's on her phone, and I like to do that to people.
Tammy Orr. I'm here to learn amazing things from Brian.
Find a different word besides amazing. Come on.
Learn profound knowledge from Ryan. We're looking to close on next buy and hold in probably December. And what is your why for doing real estate? Really to kind of just have a long-term growth vehicle for retiring someday and having something there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, welcome to class. Hello.
Hi, I'm Donna. I just closed on a duplex a couple weeks ago, so it'll be 11 months and a couple weeks.
Nomad?
I can buy another one, yeah.
Nice.
So, let's see, so that's how long it will be, and I'm doing it for my grandchildren.
Very nice. Very nice. Gretchen.
as soon as I can figure it out.
Perfect.
I don't know. I would like to, but I find it really hard if you're in Colorado to find any deals. People are not doing deals, so I'm having a hard time with that. But still working at it. And why? For passive income.
Cool.
I would like to eventually have my own property for passive.
Nice.
Yeah, my name's Rob. I'm shooting for maybe mid to late May. First kind of single family house, get it going. And why is just keep on getting more and more cash flowing through the pipes. So trying to get that going.
That just reminds me of that horse running through the tubes of the internet video. I'm going to have to show that in class sometime.
The internet's getting clogged.
Yeah, it's getting clogged. You got to put the horses through to get it back out. Yeah. Brandon.
I'm Brandon. Hopefully within the next 6 months for the next buy and hold. And the why is long-term investment, retirement, hopefully early retirement.
Nice. Hello?
James, hopefully first quarter next year, and I have a revenue stream.
Nice. We finally got another James.
No, actually, his name isn't James. His name is Sherman.
That's right.
He doesn't even go by James. I don't know. He threw me off. I'm like, why is he saying his name is James? That's not even his name.
I was like,
Go by
Like
James?
8 Bryans.
My friends know me, right, James?
Really? I thought everyone called you Sherman.
Most people.
you're not his friend.
Apparently.
Seems pretty clear. Just saying. I mean, I just called him James. We're friends. But you, no.
There's like 9 Bryans.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think anyone has ever been here since I've been coming that was James other than you. Right? There's Jims, but no James. So there's like 20 Bryans that come to class. Hi.
I'm Gunner. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing my next buy and hold or my first one. I just started to get into the investment real estate world. And why? Because I'm interested in real estate. I just graduated with real estate finance from CSU. So
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
Tyler.
All right, I'm Tyler. I'm going to be buying my next property hopefully next summer. And my why is financial freedom one day.
Nice. Hello.
I'm Eileen. I'm here to be supportive of him. I know nothing about this. And why, so I know what he's talking about.
Perfect. That's great. It's good to have that support. It's actually key. I think it's in my slide somewhere tonight. Hello.
Hello, I'm Christian. I'm looking to buy my next property, or first property in 2 years, as I'm only 19 years old. And my why is passive income and retire off of it.
Nice. Awesome. Hello.
Hi, my name's Eric. Trying to buy maybe in 1 or 2 years or so. My why is great way to invest my money.
Awesome. Cool. Hello.
Brent, probably in the next 3 to 6 months, we're hoping to buy our first property. And why is I want to make myself some money and not someone else.
Nice. Good reason.
My name's Eric. Hoping to purchase one by next summer. And my why is also for passive income, hopeful income streams.
Nice. Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison. Hopefully I'll be able to buy something in a few years, and my why is similar to everyone else's why, passive income.
Nice. Joe.
I'm Joe. We are closing on our next house, hopefully November, but I just heard possibly December, so we'll see what happens. And my why, it's because I get bored in the evenings and I have nothing better to do. No.
That's your why.
So, all right. So if you can just pull your chair back up here, we're going to do an intervention hot seat. I'm like, seriously? We need a hot seat. That cannot be your why. You should have the best why in this entire room.
I love it. I love to do it. I love the passive income, what everybody else has said. It's amazing. I love doing it.
Nice. Hello.
Howdy, I'm Scott, and same thing, passive income.
You're Scott.
I'm Scott.
Your name tag says Russell.
I know.
Okay.
Last name's Russell.
Okay.
I don't know.
I was like we got James and Sherman. I'm like, wow, you guys are just messing with me. Everybody put a different name tag on. That's awesome. Holy cow. So it's Scott.
Scott.
Okay. Shit.
Or Russell. It happens all the time.
Perfect.
2 first names. And hopefully in the next year, we're looking for our first property, start creating financial streamlines, and it's more for freedom in the future, hopefully in the next 10 or 15 years or so.
Awesome. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, just looking to buy with him in the next year, and then also I've been in property management for 2 years, and it's all well and good managing other people's properties, but it'd be nice to have my own as well. So.
Nice. And what's your name? Because I can
Oh,
see it, but they
Stephanie,
can't.
sorry.
Yeah. It's not. I was gonna make sure. I was like, I'm not gonna call her Stephanie. It's probably Russell. I mean, I don't know. Lashana.
I'm Lashana. I'm planning on buying this year, and I found out I could speed up the process too, so that's nice. And my why is so I can have time to give back to kids mostly, whether they're my own or other people's kids too.
I didn't know you had kids.
I don't have kids yet.
I was just beating James to that joke. I knew he was going there. James.
I'm James, and what Tammy said.
Nope.
We're buying our next one. We'll probably close in December. What's our why for doing real estate? Yeah, it's kind of long-term investing sort of stuff.
Nice. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Williams. I'm a long-term buy and hold investor in Northern Colorado. And when am I buying my next buy and hold property? Well, I just got a lead in my in my inbox on the way here for a property next to one I already own. So maybe soon. I've been buying for quite a while, so I'm not in a hurry to buy much else at this point. My why for doing real estate is really about my family and the freedom that it gives both myself and my family to go and do what we want, when we want to do it, where we want to do it, without being tied down. So, and we'll talk a little bit about whys. But this class is basically all of the basics. So for those of you that weren't in the room, that came in a little bit after I started, this is the class that gives the overview for the next, I don't know, 6 months at least of classes, if not more like a year and a half of classes. So we teach in depth a lot of times. This class is like the high level overview of how to get your first deal done. And pretty much every slide, if not every bullet point, could be made into its own individual class. The last time I taught this class, the very next week, James taught a class off one of my bullet points, and he taught a 2-hour class on it. So if you have questions, ask him. We're going to try and answer as many questions as possible. But we're going to start off.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So housekeeping stuff. If you guys
Oh,
have
yeah.
these forms, if you fill them out, I will trade you for a book. Allison, if you hold up the book to show people what the book looks like. So if you go ahead and give Allison that, and if you do it sooner than later, because she sometimes leaves right after class, and I had some people last week that tried to hand their form in at like 9 o'clock, and there were no books left because they were already taken home. So if you want to do that, that'd be great.
Yeah. How many people is this their first time here?
A lot.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah. So welcome. We're glad you're here. I think the weather has detracted a few people from showing up. The first nice day of fall finally showed up today. But back to the presentation, what's your goal, right? And so kind of I asked what's your why, but really the place to start for buying a buy and hold is understanding what your goal is, right? So if you answered the question of when's your next buy and hold going to be bought, and you were like, you know, I'm on track for April of next year, then you probably have a good goal in mind and you're working towards a plan. If you were wishy-washy on that answer, you probably need to sit down and first go, what are my goals, right? And I'm joking with Joe, like we did a hot seat thing where, you know, basically Joe put his life on the line and came up here and was like, this is what I'm trying to do. And then we kind of, you know, tore into his goals and made him really solidify it. But if you don't have that in place, it's really difficult to achieve what you want to achieve. And this goes, a couple weeks ago, I reviewed the book, The One Thing. If you haven't read the book, The One Thing, go read it, and that will help you focus on exactly what your one thing is. But a lot of people say, oh, I just want to be financially free, right? That's my goal. I just want financial freedom. I don't want to have to work a job I don't like. So what does that actually mean, though? What is financial freedom? It's like I have $1 million in the bank. I have $10,000 in passive income. I have 20 houses. Like, what does that mean to you? Is it wealth? Is it for you? Is it for your grandkids or your kids or someone else, right? Is it more time with family and friends, right? For me, this is a big part of it, right? And why I do it. And how do you actually quantify this, right? Is it I can spend Saturdays with them, or is it I can go and you know what, let's go to take a 2-week trip, go drive around the US and do whatever we want and not have to worry about it. Do you want lots of travel? A ski home? James does not like to travel. Do you want a ski home? There's somebody here, I forget who wants the island. Oh, Doug.
That was Doug.
Doug, yeah. Doug wants his own island, right? A few nice cars. Are you doing it for charitable reasons? We had somebody here in the past who was like, I want to make $1 million a year in passive income because I want to go do charitable things with that. Do you just want to pay your mortgage with rental income, right? And that seems like if you already have a mortgage on your own personal residence, depending on how much your mortgage is, having that paid by passive income is a huge step, right? It takes that burden off. Hey, instead of having to pay $1,500 a month to my mortgage company, it's basically like I'm living for free in my house now, right? And that was my first goal, right? Was I want my mortgage payment paid. And your first goal might be I want my utility bills paid, right? So, and all your bills as well. Do you want 5K, 10K, 25K, 100K? What is your actual goal? Or is it just a dollar amount in a bank account? So think about what your goal actually is. And then once you've got your goal, just like in the one thing, right? We need a plan to get there. We need to start knocking the dominoes down to actually get you where you want to go. So how do we do that? Begin with the end in mind. James, where's that from? Very good. Which book?
7 Habits of Highly Effective.
Yeah, so if you haven't read that, it's a good book to read. But this also relates to the one thing, right? The one thing is visualize out as far as you possibly can, right? How do you want to change the world, right? And then work yourself back to what do I need to do today to take that first step to get going. And your plan isn't meant to be, I'm going to follow this perfectly, because things are going to change, right? It's a guide. Don't just write it down and then bullhead through it, right? Adapt as things need to change. Avoid shiny object syndrome, right? If you can't read this, it says, hey, we need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, a squirrel, right? Right? There are a lot of people that come to class and they have a goal, and it's like, hey, I want to have $5,000 a month in passive income. Great, how are you going to get there? Oh, I'm going to do wholesaling. Okay, have you ever done real estate before? No. Okay, well, that's maybe a difficult first path. And then they go to a seminar and they hear about fix and flips. Oh, forget that wholesaling thing. Fix and flips is the way to go, and I'm going to go do that. And then they come back to class and we're teaching buy and hold that night. Oh, I'm doing buy and hold now, right? Avoid constant switching, right? Stay focused. I should have had why don't I have a The Rock focus video in here? Man, all the new people are like, what is this guy talking about? But if you haven't been here, Dwayne The Rock Johnson has a bunch of videos where he's just yelling at other people in the gym, focus! And it's pretty funny. I use it a lot, right? Map out what following your plan looks like. And like we did this with Joe in the hot seat, right? Mapping out, hey, what is your plan going to look like? How are you going to get there from today till 5 years from now when you want to be at 5K a month in passive income? And I would map it out as far as you can. And in order to actually see your progress, what do we need to do? We need to actually figure out what our personal financial statement looks like and then track that across time, right? How many of you are currently tracking, this is what my personal financial statement is this month, and updating it once a month or once a quarter? Yeah, so you guys have a head start, right? You already know where you're at, and you can see the regular progress over time. Passion. How many of you are passionate about real estate? Yeah. So if you don't have passion for real estate, it might not be for you, right? I'm not trying to have you leave, but if you're not, welcome to class. If you don't have passion, there's the door. Yeah, but for those of you that know me, like I'm a super passionate guy. I love real estate, and I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do real estate. It kind of actually just fell into my lap on accident by me renting an apartment when I moved to Fort Collins and then going, man, how much did this place cost? And oh my gosh, my landlord is killing it, right? And then so happened that the friends across the street said, we're going to sell our condo. And I was like, I'm going to buy it from you. And that started a long journey of real estate investing. But if you don't have the passion for your plan as you've developed it, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to want to put in the hours, staying up late, getting up early, going to an appointment on Saturday, right? Doing the things that you need to do. A deal pops up tonight at 9 o'clock and I see it and I'm like, James, and we'll be on it, right? We may write a contract tonight. I may stay up till midnight tonight to negotiate what needs to go in the contract. He's calling the seller's agent, and we're trying to get it locked down before anybody sees it tomorrow, right? That's the passion that you need.
That's happened. I mean, we saw a deal like beginning of class, and like by the time we were done
Yeah.
with class an hour later, it was like we were almost under contract.
Yeah, Tammy left, went to write the contract, and you know, I don't know who was teaching that. I think it was me.
Actually, a year ago. It was a year and a month ago because that was the one I told you about.
Oh, was it?
the other day.
Yeah. Yep. So it actually happened a year and a day ago.
I
I
want
went.
to comment on the plan part.
Sure.
So I think a lot of people have a problem, challenge coming up with a plan and doing that. So for the Nomads, at least, we do the plan for you. We
Yeah.
outline exactly every step you need to do. We show you the financial models and everything, so you don't need to worry about that.
Yep. So set achievable goals that are going to help you reach your ultimate goal, right? And again, I taught this presentation before I had reviewed the one thing. For next time when I teach this, I'll go back and update some stuff to actually call out the one thing book because it's so good. So this was the question that I asked at the beginning, and I got what I consider fairly typical answers, right? I want passive income, I want an income stream, but I think it's deeper than that. And so that might be your answer in class, and you might not want to share your deeper why, which is totally fine, but you need to have one, right? It can't just be for money. It's got to be something that's going to motivate you to keep going, to stay up late, to do those things that you maybe don't want to do to actually be successful, especially when stuff gets hard, right? A lot of people say, hey, I want to quit my job. I don't like my job. Hey, I just want a lot of money in the bank. And I think that's great, but for most of us, it's not enough, right? I'm sure there's one person out there who's like, I just love money, right? Like, if I can just have more money, and they're totally motivated by piles of cash in their house. But for most people, that's just not going to do it, right? You're going to be excited about it, and you're going to be like, yeah, I want extra income. If my mortgage payment was paid, I would love that. But at some point, a year down the road or 6 months down the road when things are tough, you just kind of run out of gas. You're like, I don't really want to do this anymore. It's hard, right? So path of least resistance, in that case, guess what it is? It's the job you already have. And so you just kind of slowly stay in your current job, and you don't do what it takes to get there. So for everybody who doesn't have a deeper why, go home and think about this. Figure out why you're actually doing real estate, right? What is it that's going to do? Is it a better life for your family? Is it to help end puppy mills? Is it to help the homeless? Is it to, rebuild, Houston or Puerto Rico or, anything like that, right? What is your why? And if you don't get a little bit kind of emotional or the chills when you think about it, keep going, keep digging. Find that thing where you're like, yeah, this is it. I'm totally motivated by this all the time, and it doesn't fade. So have your why. Build your team, right? This is the precursor to all the stuff that actually you do to get your first deal. But if this stuff's not in place, it's really hard to continue down that path of getting your first deal. So what are we going to do? We're going to find a real estate agent or a realtor. You're in luck. I happen to know the best one. He happens to be in the room tonight. Tammy. I totally should have done that. I should have put a picture of Tammy up. Duly noted. Next time. Call James. He's super easy, right? And like most of you guys know, I guess most of you don't know because you're like, who is this guy and who is James? James and I are best friends, but he was my realtor first before we became good friends. It happened all kind of at the same time. But how do I know he's the best? Because I've dealt with the rest, right? And it sucks, right? It's like if you're trying to do investing, a lot of agents have no idea what investing actually is in real estate. They're very used to, and my dad was a real estate agent for 40 years, and he did first-time home buyers, right? And that was his focus. If you would have asked him to go do commercial or something different, he wouldn't have known. And I think that's okay, but the majority of real estate agents aren't around to do investments for investors, right? They might have a few clients that are investors, but most of their deals are people wanting to buy and live in homes, right? James is kind of the opposite of that. He is very focused on investor, and my guess is that, 80 or 90% of your clientele are actually investors. So if you want somebody who knows the market, who has more data on his website than anyone else because he created the data. It's got charts for everything. Go look at his website. But really, I've worked with other agents even after working with him because it was the only way to get the deal done, and it's terrible, right? I mean, I could tell you an hour of stories about why not to do it. So, some people have this question. Hey, James, I like you. I'm going to use you if you bring me a deal. But you know what? I also like 7 other agents who said they'd bring me deals. So why not do that? How many of you guys think this? Come on, don't be shy. Somebody's thought this, right? Like, I'm just going to ask every agent, hey, if you bring me a deal, I will totally use you. Seems fair, right? But if you're that agent, are you going to want to give your deal to them and have them maybe just disappear because you know they're saying that to other agents? Or do you want somebody that's a loyal client? What's your relationship with your agent? Is important to know, right? Is it a buyer agency? James, should people sign a buyer agency with an agent?
I think so. I think you want someone representing you and your best interest when you're negotiating, when you're going through the transaction. I don't think you want someone who's just, acting as a referee, which is a transaction broker.
Yeah, but doesn't that mean that if I sign a buyer's agency with you, I can't have 10 other agents?
You can structure it such that you do have it carved out for specific niches, but it's really unusual to do that.
Yeah. So in all seriousness, don't try to do that, right? It doesn't work out well for anybody involved. If your agent that you're signing a buyer's agency isn't willing to terminate your buyer's agency with you, maybe you might not want to use them, right? I don't know if this is in your buyer's agency. What is your actual clause?
It's a default that says if you want to cancel, you can send me an email at any time in the agreement.
Yep.
So it's super easy. You don't even have to call me if you're not feeling comfortable. You just email me and say we're done. And
Yeah.
it's over.
Yep. And then there's transaction broker. So if James was the listing agent on a house and I decided, oh, I want to buy that house, and he was basically going to have both sides of that, and he could actually be many different roles. But in this example, he just decides, I'm not actually going to represent either client. I'm just going to help the transaction happen. That's a transaction broker. At that point, he's not giving the seller any advice on what they should do, and he's not giving me any advice on what I should do. He's just shuffling paper in a matter of speaking back and forth.
And technically, it doesn't have to be I'm representing both sides. It could be that I'm just representing you as transaction broker, which just means I'm not giving you advice. I'm not looking out for your best interest.
Yep. And then lastly, seller's agency, where you as the buyer would just be a customer, right? So if there's only one agent involved and he says, hey, I'm going to represent the seller, right? At that point, I am just a customer to him. He's not giving me advice. I'm responsible for my own stuff, but he's a realtor and we need a licensed realtor, at least in the case where he's already listed it, to do the transaction. So just understand what you are getting from your realtor, right? And if James is representing you, in 99% of the cases, it's probably going to be buyer agency, unless you're selling a house, and that'll be a seller agency.
The worst one, in my opinion, for buyers is being a customer.
Yep.
Where there's an agent involved, but the agent has the best interest of the seller involved, a seller in mind, and they are not representing you. You are a customer.
And you don't really have representation, right? It's like going to a court case where the other attorney is working with you, but really they're representing a client, right? They're like, oh yeah, you show up at court on this date and we'll be there ready to bowl you over and win the case. So build your team. Somebody said this in the beginning, right? Supportive family and friends are really key. If you go home every night and your significant other is like, this real estate stuff is stupid, right? You're gonna lose all of our money, right? It's really hard to be successful, right? You've got negativity kind of bringing you down.
And it could be even more subtle than that. It
Yes.
could be that they're not opposed to real estate, but they're like, why are you always working on this? Why don't you spend time with the family? Why aren't you, hanging out with us and watching TV for 3 hours tonight? So it could be less obvious than real estate's stupid. Why are you doing real estate?
Yes. It can be very subtle. So find supportive family and friends. I'm not saying, get rid of friends that don't like real estate, but maybe just don't talk about real estate around them and you'll get it done. Mentors, right? Mentors can be super important. When you're looking for someone to be a mentor, please don't come up at the end of class and ask me if I'll be your mentor. This is the worst possible way you can go about getting a mentor ever. You want to actually develop a relationship, right? go and buy that person a cup of coffee and pick their brain. And if it's a good fit, it'll naturally kind of happen, right? But what you want to find is somebody who's good and successful at what you want to do, right? If they're not successful at what you want to do, how are they going to help you get there, right? Makes sense. They probably need to know your market well. There are all sorts of people that could be mentors for fixing and flipping houses. However, in northern Colorado, most of the strategies that they teach in all the classes don't work here, right? Our market is out of whack with the rest of the fix and flip market. Attorneys, if you were on the webinar last night, asset protection, right? You need an asset protection attorney. Start this at the beginning. If you're doing Nomad, we covered it in depth last night. Leases, related contracts, right? James can help you with the purchase contract, but James is also not an attorney, right? So he can explain what the contract means, but if you really want hardcore advice, you need an attorney.
So an update to that, so we actually, Tammy and I paid to have our attorney provide a $6,000 lease and option agreement, issuing lease options, that is attorney approved for Colorado for clients.
Yep.
So now, we don't do asset protection documents, but as far as contracts and leases, we do provide that.
Yep. And an eviction attorney, and basically you can just ask James or I, and there's usually one guy if it's in this local area that we go to. Mortgage brokers and lenders, right? You want to have probably more than one, but you don't want 10, right? Having 2 people you can call and say, hey, I'm putting a property under contract, what are your terms? That would be great. But understanding what different mortgage brokers can bring, right? There are people that represent Fannie Mae for kind of conventional loans or FHA loans, and then there are banks like First Bank that's a portfolio lender who will do different terms than a conventional loan. So understanding what those options are when you go to buy, right? You go to First Bank and buy in a portfolio, you could buy directly in an LLC, which is fantastic. You go to Fannie Mae, you're signing on it personally. So you're still signing on it personally with First Bank, but your name's not on public record. Insurance agent. We don't have one. Do we have any insurance agents in the room tonight? He's not here. Yeah, I know he's an insurance agent. I just didn't know if there were any others. Having a great insurance agent, right? Quote around for if you have a house now, call a couple and quote, right? Find out who's going to be cheaper and who knows about investment properties, right? Some insurance people know a lot more. Home inspector, and all of these are on. James has a referral site, jamesorr.com/referral or referrals. I can never remember, so I usually type both. And you can find all of who we recommend. Title agent and a closer. Typically, if you're buying a house, the seller is going to be choosing title, so you won't have to worry about this. But there are times where you get to choose, and having a favorite sometimes pays off for you. If you develop a relationship over time, they can get a little bit of extra stuff done or maybe do it a little faster. Your email may come to the top of the priority list if they know it's you. A CPA, a bookkeeper if needed. These are kind of the obvious lower tier ones as you get stuff going. Having a good handyman, right? This can pay back very well. If you have a handyman, when you call him, he's willing to go show up for you. That's awesome, right? Unfortunately, I lost my handyman, I don't know, like 2 years ago, but I put a lot of my stuff under property management. But I had a handyman, I would just call him, and he would go, right? And he would deal with the tenant. I'd say, here's the tenant's name and number. He'd go, schedule the appointment, get it done, and then bill me, right? Very little hassle. Plumbers, electricians, all this stuff is on James's website. And then obviously, as needed, all the rest of the stuff that you need to run your property. There's some things that you gain over time. So as you start to do more and more deals, you'll find people that are like, hey, I see what you're doing there. I would like to invest some money, right? So you'll find some partners that want to invest with you. You can find some people that are willing to just loan you money to do deals. So this becomes important, I think, longer term down your road in your real estate careers. And I already said that one too. So here's our recap of how to start. Class is not over after the slide, in case you're wondering. Set your goals, build your plan, right? Without the goal, you don't know where you're going. You got to build the plan to get there. And then understand your why. Build your team. Start with these, right? We got those. These are really the ones you need. Get your financial house in order. How many of you guys know what your credit score is today? Yeah. How many of you know what you would qualify for if you went to a lender on a loan? Yeah. These are like some simple things that you can do now so that you understand what you can actually afford to buy, right? Which becomes super important, right? How many of you guys have a budget? Yeah. Budgets are important. They help you save for down payment, right? Although James will show you how to do it with $3,000. Go repair your credit, right? Repairing your credit is not as simple as you think it is, and it's not as intuitive either, right? If you're like, oh, you know, I've got all this debt, I'm just gonna go pay it all off. That may or may not improve your credit score. So go talk to someone who actually understands how to repair credit and have them help you. Don't go open a bunch of new credit lines. Don't close a bunch of credit lines. Don't ever have more than a third of your actual allowable credit limit on a credit card spent at any one time. All those things hurt your credit score, right? But it doesn't seem intuitive. It's like, hey, if I charge a bunch and then I pay it off over time, that should improve my credit score. And it might not, depending on how much you charge. So if you don't have those things done, you got 3 months before 2018. Don't wait till January 1st and set your goal to like do all this then. Set a goal today, have it done by January 1, 2018. And then,
about 3 months, by the way.
yeah. And if you're, don't be like everybody else. January 1st, you'd be like setting your goals. This way you're like, hey, I just accomplished a major goal. So, all right. With your plan in place, what do we do now, right? Now it's time to actually talk about going and finding a buy and hold property and taking it down. Find the best real estate agent. We already did this. Look at that. We're done. I love that. It's going to be Tammy next time. It'll be like a morph between you and Tammy's face. It'll be awesome. So one of the really important things you can do, and the reason that I put this back up here again, is that you need to sit down with James and go over the contract, right? If you haven't gone over the contract and a deal shows up at 7 o'clock tonight in your email, and you call James and you're like, you've never done a deal with him, and you're like, I've got a bunch of questions. I need to call my attorney. I don't know what to put in this. And he's like, we're not going to get the deal, right? It's too late at that point. You need to have already read the purchase contract. You need to understand the sections, and you need to know what you're probably going to put in there. James actually teaches a class that I'm sure is coming up where we actually sit down in class and you fill out the contract. We walk through everything in the contract so that you understand it. But this is something that you do with your clients that are new. Yep, I already said all of that. Go compare mortgage brokers and lenders, right? What are we looking for when we're going to compare them, right? First, get a couple recommendations from us or call whoever you want. There are a ton of banks in town. There are probably even more mortgage brokers around, right? And they don't even have to be local. But there's several that we like and recommend that have done transactions very well and smoothly. But go find out, what's your interest rate? What are your terms? Can you do 30-year fixed loans? What's your interest rate on that? How much do I need to put down? What's the minimum I could put down? Right? Do I get any discounts if I put more down? There's all sorts of questions you can ask, right? And are you doing, Nomad, where you're putting maybe 1% or 3% or 5% down? Or are you doing traditional buy and hold rental where you're putting 15, 20, 25, or even 30 or 35% down, depending on the property? You get to find out your credit score in case you don't know it. And if you're looking at, just a side note on credit score, I don't know how good Credit Karma is in being accurate with your credit score, but like I have a Citibank MasterCard and they like give you your credit score for free. It's just bull, right? Like their credit score for me is like crazy off of what it actually is. It's like 90 points higher, right, than it actually is. And I have a great credit score, but I look at it and I go, that's not what my credit score actually is. So a lender will pull your credit, but when you're shopping, don't actually let them pull your credit. When they pull your credit, it's actually going to be a hit on your credit. Your credit score will go down for a little while. So when you're ready to actually select a lender, that's when you want to have them pull your credit. Just tell them, hey, I know what my credit score is. I want you to quote this as if I had a 740, right? Or a 650, or whatever it is your credit score is. Tell them what it is and have them quote and tell them, if I choose you, you're more than welcome to pull the credit score. But until then, just assume, because I'm trying to figure out what your prices are. Super important. Compare it on the same day. If I ask lender number 1 today, and in a week I ask lender number 2, and he's like a half point lower, but actually a week later the rates went down, so he's also the same rate, but he costs a little more, I'm not going to have an equal comparison. Call him on the same day, spend a couple hours on the phone, and get the same information. Ask for the fees. What kind of fees do we care about with a mortgage broker or a lender? Origination fee. Yes. So that's one of the fees that can definitely change, right? Some people charge an origination fee. It's like, hey, you're doing a loan with me, I'm going to charge you $695. And Joe's like, well, the other lender said 0, so I'm going with them, right? Underwriting. So some are $695 for origination, $995 for underwriting. What are those fees? They're just ways of getting more money. They're having people process your file, but maybe you don't need to pay for it. There are lenders out there who are completely free of origination and completely free of underwriting. And in fact, appraisal costs, which the appraisal cost is determined by the appraiser that they actually hire, but we've seen some crazy range in, a crazy range in an appraisal costing, $400, or what was the crazy one, like $1,800? Yeah, was it still a single family home? Yeah, so $400 to $1,800 is pretty crazy. The $1,800 one is an anomaly, but finding someone who has decent appraisal costs in general, or who is willing to say, hey, it's $400 to $500, and then sticking to that, and the lender that we know, one of the lenders we know will actually pay for the appraisal, assuming you close.
They don't do that anymore.
Really?
They stopped doing it.
Wow. That's too bad.
They were stopped doing it under advice of attorney.
Really? Interesting. So they no longer pay for the appraisal. That's too bad. I happened to do a bunch of refis with them at the beginning of last year, and they paid for all my appraisals. So it was literally a zero cost closing to me, which was amazing.
They're still probably one of the best lenders, even without that.
Yes.
The appraisals.
Yep. So this could be 0, like we talked about, or it could be thousands and thousands of dollars. So you want to find out what those fees are. There's other fees, such as tax service, flood cert, all the running back and forth of the documents. Those fees are pretty standard. So you can ask them what they are, but it doesn't usually change that much lender to lender. Do you have something?
Yeah, I do want to add one thing. So when you pick your lender, and one of the reasons why we'd like to give you a list of ones that have actually performed, showed up at closing with money, is if you pick a lender that we've never worked with before, and you get all the way to closing, and the lender doesn't show up with your money to actually close, you, the buyer, are in default of the contract. It's not the lender. You are in default, and you could actually have some problems with the seller for not showing up with the money.
Yep. So if you happen to find a lender or a mortgage broker who has their own investment experience or who's dealt with a lot of investors, that helps too, especially if you're trying to buy multiple houses, right? In the Nomad model, we buy one house, we live in it, a year later we move out and we buy another one and we turn the previous one into a rental. Now, that lender that has no kind of previous investment experience has a really hard time when you get to house number 4 and you're like, hey, I'm gonna move out and I wanna buy house number 5. Can you tell me how me renting this at this rent is gonna affect my ability to qualify for this next house? It's hard for other people to understand that, and then just hard for them to get the loan actually pushed through in some cases, because they're like, well, he's moving out, he's just gonna do this again. They don't understand what's going on. So we've got some that actually work well with investors and have that knowledge. Any questions so far? Feel free to ask. I know there's a lot of new people. Ask a bunch of questions if you want.
So we're going into a lot more detail on some of the financing stuff. He's going to cover some, but there's like a 2-hour class on the financing component that we're going over in like a week or 2.
Yeah, it's like next week, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, this slide is basically an entire presentation, or these 2 slides is an entire presentation next week. So types of financing, FHA and VA. This is smaller down payments. VA could be 0. FHA is usually 3.5. Your offer is typically weaker if this is what your loan is, because there are sometimes contingencies from that lender. Like an FHA lender will require, that the property is in good enough condition, where you might be like, it's just a simple, hole in the fascia by the roof, and they're like, nope, you have to fix it before closing, when it really doesn't affect the actual property. So for a seller, they go, man, if I have a guy who's doing a conventional loan or paying cash versus an FHA, the FHA offer will a lot of times look weaker. Some of the closing costs actually can't be paid by the buyer on an FHA loan. And appraisal deadlines can be extended by the lender without penalty. So that's a weird one, right? Your lender basically gets to say, yeah, our appraisal, we're extending the deadline. Nothing you can do about it. If you're the seller, that kind of sucks, right? I need to be out of my house. I'm buying another house, and you're going to extend, and that's just part of the deal. Conventional loans, larger down payments, although not really anymore. 1%, 3%, 5%. even 15%. I wish that had been around when I was buying my investment properties. Putting 15% down instead of 20 or 25 would have been amazing. This one, easier to get your offer accepted with this type of financing, and obviously all cash. What do we think? Is that weaker or stronger? Stronger, right? Because you can just walk in with a briefcase of money and set it on the table and they'll give you the deed. You do fast closings, but this is definitely better in the eye of the seller. A quick note on unwarrantable condos. So if you are investing and you're going to buy condos and they have HOAs, a lot of the times you will run into situations where more than 50% of that condominium complex is a rental, right? The HOA keeps track. And so if it is in that case, your condo becomes what's called an unwarrantable condo, and you may not be able to get traditional conventional financing, although we do have a lender who does that, right?
We have a couple. Some of the credit unions tend to do some of the unwarrantable stuff for owner occupants.
Yes.
And then we have First Bank also does some for investors, but they're.
Yep.
The challenge you have for a lot of people is not all the other agents know about that, so it definitely limits your buyer pool when you try to go to sell.
Yes. Yep. So I'm very familiar with that because the first property I bought, like I told you, was a condo, and they were going to sell it, and it turned out I couldn't get traditional financing, so I had to put more money down to make it an investment property, and I had to go to a portfolio lender where it wasn't a 30-year fixed loan. So, all right. What can you afford? This is another one of those questions where if you don't have your financial house in order, you probably don't know what you can go out and buy today, right? So how much money do you have for down payment today? You know, do you have 1 to 5%? Guess what? We have a plan for that. It's called Nomad, right? Go get an FHA loan, go get a conventional loan, get a VA loan. I guess I should have put 0% too. Yes, or $1,000. Yeah, there's so many more options. It's amazing. Or if you're just doing straight up investment, right, you could go find a partner to partner with and buy a property that way, right? If you have a good deal and you want to get it done, the money will be there, right? You can bring it to class and we can probably point you in the right direction. 15% plus for down payment, you can do 30-year fixed conventional loan like we just talked about. What do you need to do first? Go get pre-approved. Go find the lender, right? You've done your lender calls, you've picked the lender that you want to work with. Now go tell them exactly what your situation is. Give them your documents. Here's my W-2s, here's my 2 years of tax returns. They will ask for a lot of stuff, right? At first you can tell them, but you're going to have to prove it eventually, right? You can get a pre-approval letter pretty easily. Yeah, I make $100,000 a year, I have no debt, and yeah, that's pretty much it. My credit score is 740. Excellent, here's a pre-approval letter, right? Assuming you had a relationship. It's really, in a lot of cases, that easy. Yeah, Rob?
How far in advance should you get pre-approved prior to buying?
When you start looking, before you start looking, you should get pre-approved, right? You should have that letter in your hand before you walk into the first house you want to see. And we'll take that one step further in a couple bullets. Get a letter from that lender that says you are approved for the purchase of a house with a loan of $200,000. Now you can know exactly what you can afford. What's awesome now is that lots of lenders will now fully underwrite you. So what used to happen is I call a lender up, I say, this is my situation. They say, that's fantastic. We will pre-approve you for this amount, which really didn't mean crap. And then I'd go find a house, I'd put it under contract, and I'd go back to the lender and I'd be like, I'm pre-approved, right? So let's just shuffle this through. And they'd be like, no, you got to give us all your documents. And now we're going to go and actually send all of your information in a file to an underwriter. And that underwriter is going to study and look at everything to make sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed. And then, and only then, will you be approved. And usually it would come back with conditions. We need a letter stating that, you know, there is no HOA in this neighborhood. Or we need, you know, a letter saying, what was this deposit of $7,000 into your bank account? It's literally sometimes that strict. Even if that $7,000 was like 0.01% of the money that you had in your bank account, they don't care. They want to know where that $7K came from. Sometimes it's really absurd. So if you could have somebody do that up front and you could truly know, hey, you are now underwritten for this loan. You are approved for this loan. That's a pretty big benefit to me. So no surprises. Here's what you normally need to submit. Loan application, which is like 5 or 6 pages long. It basically details all of your assets and liabilities. I own these properties, I have this car, I own this really expensive jewelry, whatever it is. Details everything on there. W-2s for the last 2 years, a couple pay stubs, tax returns for 2 years. So if you're not saving this and you're not scanning it in and you don't have it easily accessible, get your financial house in order, right? Go do that stuff so it's ready. Because when a lender asks for it, if it takes you a month to get it to them, it's just a month you're delaying. And if you were looking at a deal, deal's gone. It's too late, right? You just don't get to it. All of your checking, savings, investment, and retirement account statements for the last 2 to 3 months, right? So we're getting more detailed, right? They're going to want that. Proof of source of down payment funds, which may well be included in one of your checking or saving statements, so it may be duplicate. And then what's crazy is they're going to ask for all sorts of other stuff, and it's really going to piss you off, right? At some point, you're just going to be like, okay, I've shown you everything. It's clear that I can afford the house. What's your problem? And they're just like, yeah, we need the name of your expected third son. You know, and you're like, what? I'm not even having kids, right? I mean, whatever it is, they're asking for way too much is what it feels like. All I can say is have your stuff already all scanned in. When they ask, no matter how dumb it is, just drag and drop the attachments into the email and click send. Don't give them grief. They're not doing it because they don't like you. They're doing it because it's a requirement, and until they pass it, you don't get a loan. So the most beneficial thing you can do is have your stuff all together. Typically when I'm going to use a lender, before they even ask for it, I will just send them everything I know they need. And usually the response is, wow, I never get this. I didn't even ask for it yet. That's how I want to make my lender feel, right? Because now they're motivated to do the work for me, right? I made their job super easy. Hopefully they'll make my approval go quicker and be easy as well. All right, what's your buying criteria? How many of you guys have criteria for what you're looking to buy? How many of you have it written down? How many of you really have it written down? So here's some suggestions that I would make, and then I'm going to actually show you what mine were or are because I have mine written down as well. So type, are you looking to buy a single family home? Are you looking for commercial? Are you looking for industrial, which is outside the scope of this class and probably this meeting for that matter? Where are you looking to buy? Are you looking to buy in Fort Collins? Are you looking to buy in Old Town? Are you looking to buy in northern Colorado? And does that include Greeley and Evans and smaller towns like Eaton and Alt? Does it include Frederick and Dacono? Like, what does it include? Does it include Longmont? How about North Denver? Right? You really need to know. Are you looking somewhere out of state? I'm only buying in Minneapolis, Indianapolis, and any other towns that end in Appolis. This is the only place I'm buying, right? That could be a good criteria. Probably not. Are you buying out of country? Right? A lot of people will buy vacation homes out of country as investment properties. That is also pretty much outside the scope of this class as well. Price. How much are you looking to spend? Right? There's a big difference between saying I'm going to buy single family homes in the $300,000 range and I'm going to buy commercial properties for $7 million, right? Vastly different type of property. What kind of size are you looking for? How many bedrooms? Are you buying one-ones, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, right? Maybe that's a good investment, maybe not. Is it a house? Is it an apartment? Are you buying a 7 bedroom, 5,000 square foot house to rent? Does anyone want to buy that house to rent? Probably not, especially not in Fort Collins with the 3 unrelated rule, right? If it was 7 bedrooms in Loveland, you could charge by the bedroom. Maybe you'd make a decent amount of money. But if it's a super big house, it's just more house to take care of. It's more stuff that gets damaged. It's more things to replace during turnover. Typical kind of investments are anywhere for houses, I think, are typically at least 2 bedrooms up to 4 and sometimes 5. But 3 and 4 bedroom houses are really the meat of the single family investment market. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
What's the condition of the property? Are you looking for stuff that's run down that you can then go in and fix up and then rent? There's a good strategy for that, especially if you're going to refinance out and you're able to do that. It's called the BRRRR strategy. Or are you looking for stuff, which was my personal case, and I think James thought I was crazy early on. I was buying stuff that was already fixed up and nice because I didn't want to go in. I don't have that skill set. I'm not a hammer swinger, right? I can fix a computer, but Repairing anything else like physical is not my thing. So for me, I wanted stuff that was ready to go. You know, go in, clean it, carpet cleaning, you're good to go. And I bought properties that way. Cash on cash. So we're going to invest, we'll just call it $100,000 for easy math. We're going to invest $100,000. How much money are we going to get back every year, right? Cash on cash, the cash that we're getting back on the cash we put in. So if we get $10,000 back a year off our $100,000, we're getting what percent? 10% cash on cash. So what's your minimum bar? Is it 0 in our current market in Fort Collins? Is it 5? And is that managed, unmanaged? We'll talk about that. What's your overall return on investment? So for those of you that are new, there's a spreadsheet. Where is the spreadsheet actually at now?
LearnToBeRich.com/spreadsheet.
So we've built a spreadsheet for you. It does everything you're going to need. It calculates all these numbers. You won't even look at most of it. The spreadsheet has been around for years at this point, and it's free. You guys can go and download it, plug the numbers in, LearnToBeRich.com/spreadsheet. But it will tell you what your return on investment is if you plug all the numbers in. So you got to know, hey, I'm looking to make what percent? What percent's reasonable on a single family home?
I think 30%. I think that's a really good bar to try to hit overall, not cash on cash.
Yep. So how many people think a 30% per year return seems excessive? No one. Awesome. You guys are in the right place. And what's really key to this is if James as your agent doesn't understand what you're looking for, it's hard for him to help you find it. So if your criteria change over time, you buy a few houses and you're like, man, these 3 bedrooms, everyone's asking for 4. Now you want to buy 4 bedrooms? Let him know, right? Have an ongoing discussion with your agent so that they understand what's going on. And this is always true. When you see properties, you're going to be like, yeah, this is what I thought I was looking for, but this is not what I want. I actually want something totally different than this. So here's criteria that are, I might have changed. Mine's a little more in depth than this, but I wanted to show you actual criteria.
Hey, before you go into yours, I
Yeah.
want you to just comment on for a second. Is everyone going to have the same criteria? Or if someone has different criteria from you, are they wrong?
No, of course not. Everyone's going to have different criteria, right? My criteria, which you're about to see, are what I decided would work for me. If you want to go invest in the rest of the country, go for it, right? Just do your homework, right? Don't just decide I'm going to go invest in Minneapolis and not go learn about the market and not find somebody super knowledgeable that can help you there.
Yeah, there are investors that focus on, 1-bedroom studio apartments, and that's their niche, or
Yeah.
2-bedroom condos, or
Yeah, all condos, all townhomes, no yard maintenance, right? I mean,
or they want student rentals, and so they
Yeah.
always want 5-bedroom properties in places that don't have occupancy limits that are enforced or whatever it is.
Yep, exactly. So your criteria or yours, and they should be, just like you're updating your conversation with your agent, your criteria should update and you should keep it written down over time. So I did it in the form of questions, right? And I kind of put the questions at the top where if I don't say yes, I just stop thinking about that property, right? So for me, I say, is it in Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor, Greeley, Evans, or Longmont? And really Longmont's like a maybe for me, right? It has to be a really right deal. But is it in one of those towns? Yes. Okay, then I go to the next question. If not, can I buy it at a 10% plus discount, and can I get out of it in 2 to 5 years? Because my plan involves owning things that are close to where I live. And so if something came up in South Denver, I don't want to drive back and forth to South Denver to do showings or anything like that. I'm going to want to be, hey, I can make money on it. Fantastic. I'll buy it. But my goal is lease option and get out of it, right? It's not stick around. Is it in a neighborhood that has performed well or is likely to based on employment, traffic, population, and migration data, right? I cover this usually at the beginning of the year with some employment data and migration data and population and stuff. Traffic's in there because traffic patterns actually matter, right? You've probably heard that we in Fort Collins look like about 10 years behind Boulder, and our traffic patterns of who's commuting and how many people are commuting into and out of Fort Collins match what Boulder looked like about 10 years ago, right? Most of the people that work in Boulder do not live in Boulder, and that's becoming more and more true for Fort Collins. Was it built in 1960 or later? Why do I have this criteria? Who cares, Brian? Huh?
Is it lead?
So there's lead-based paint, but that's actually 1978. But Yeah, asbestos. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. But really, for me, it's the systems in the house, right? It's 2017. That's like almost 70 years ago that it was built. Stuff's getting old, right? Your electrical, your plumbing, that stuff eventually wears out. It's not designed to last forever, right? So if it's built in 1920, when am I going to have to replace it? How much is that going to cost? It's going to impact me. This being said, I own a house that was built in like 1903. So, but it was the first house I ever bought. So, is it in a floodplain? A question most people forget, right? And floodplains are tricky. For those of you that don't know, especially with like a lot of the hurricane stuff going on, people are learning they should have had flood insurance, right? You may be in the X flood zone, which basically is like you're not in a flood zone, but it's not called not a flood zone. It's actually called flood zone X. It's still a flood zone, it's just very unlikely to flood. But they still flood. So be careful. There's a 100-year flood zone, there's a 500-year flood zone, there's like an 800-year flood zone. Is there a 1,000 one?
I don't know. You know what's interesting about the 100-year flood zone, though, is
Yeah?
properties flood like every 100 years there.
Yeah.
So if you haven't had a flood in 100 years, you're probably due.
Yep.
Well, that and they redraw those lines. The maps are never really up to date because every time something happens, they're redrawing those maps.
Yeah.
I mean, it can change.
Yeah, so only buy houses on the top of hills.
Even that doesn't matter.
Big hills.
Lightning storm.
Yes. And in case you don't know, a flood insurance is not included with your normal insurance policy. You need a separate policy for flood insurance. Much like it is extra, and depending on your flood zone, it may or may not be expensive. Just like earthquake, which I don't cover in Colorado, but I lived in the Seattle area for a while, which has some earthquakes that have been pretty scary, but I had earthquake insurance on my home there because I was like, well, if an earthquake demolishes my house, huh?
How much did earthquake insurance cost?
It's about $1,000 to $1,500 a year. Yeah.
Did it vary depending on like how close to the fault line you were, I would imagine?
Yeah, I don't know what their zones were, but you know, when stuff starts shaking, it doesn't really, I mean, you're not on a fault, but stuff shook anyway. As an aside, the very first earthquake I was ever in, I was on the second story of a mall in Bellevue, Washington, and I had no idea what an earthquake even like. I knew what it was, but I was like, I had no idea what it would feel like, right? And I'm standing there with my friend whose name happened to be Brian, of course, and we look down the mall, and I swear to God, like, we look and the mall is like doing this towards us, and we're like, what is that? And it just kind of comes through, and our knees kind of did this, and then it was done, and I was like, what was that? Right? Like, that's crazy, right? And that was it, and it was a 5.5 earthquake, which isn't that big, but we were both like, we're out of here. Like, and then you're like, do I really want to walk into the like 5-level cement parking lot right now? Like, maybe we just go out the front and take the bus. The second earthquake I was in was much worse than that, and it shook for about 45 seconds, and we all thought we were going to die, but we didn't. Next criteria, is it almost rent ready? For me, this is important, right? And it's less important now because I have a property manager who could go and do the work and is willing to do the work. But when you buy a property and you put $60,000 down or 20% or 15% or whatever you're putting down, even if you put, I'll even make it more extreme. You're doing, you know, Nomad and you put 5% down, so 15K, something like that. Is that reasonable? You put 15K down, and then it turns out you need to put another 25K into the property to get it rent ready. You're not financing that $25,000. If you have just bought a property that was a little more expensive, that was already fixed up, you can finance that. So think about how much you're going to come out of pocket.
Could have bought 2 properties.
Yeah, you could have bought 2. Buy quality, for me, is important instead of investing additional money. Is it a property I want to own in 10 or more years, right? I'm thinking about long term. I don't want to buy stuff I don't want to own more than 10 years from now, in almost all cases, right? If it's a lease option and I'm trying to sell it, that's fine. I'll buy it, and hopefully it'll be sold within 5 years. But I want to make sure that I'm building my portfolio to be a portfolio that I am actually proud of and want to own. If you don't like your properties, it's hard to want to like have pride in them. So, does it have 5% cash on cash, unmanaged, so no property manager, that would be me managing it, in Fort Collins or Loveland, or at least 5% managed somewhere else, like Greeley or Evans or Windsor? And this 5% number in Fort Collins and Loveland is getting really, really impossible at this point to find because of prices. So you can kind of see down to here, like all reasonable criteria. And then I kind of make sure that I'm thinking about it in a holistic view. Is my cash on cash percentage above positive, so more than 0, at the bottom end of where I think rent is going to be? So I go out, James and I look at a house. I say, James, what do you think this is going to rent for? James notoriously says about $200 less than what the actual number is, although apparently he's been high on one lately. He says, you know, $15.95 all day long, and I'm like, James, everything around here is renting for $17.95 or $18.50. So I'm going to put $17.95 in my analysis because I think that's reasonable. But I'm going to look at it and go, you know, at $15.50, I know I could rent this all day long with no problem. Is my cash on cash still 0 or better, right? I'm looking to see in the worst case or in a bad case, am I still going to be break even or better? Can I get good financing? If I can't get good financing, I can only get a 2-year private loan, and then I need to go find something else. Maybe I don't buy that house. And especially when you're thinking about purchasing more in the future, is this purchase going to greatly impact my ability to do anything in the future? And if it is, maybe you still buy it, but you need to think about it, right? It's a decision point. Can I get reasonably priced insurance? Notice how far down the list this is for me, right? Because in almost all cases, I think the answer to this is yes. I might have to make a few extra phone calls, but there's an association called the National Real Estate Insurance Association, and they're overpriced in my opinion for when I've quoted them, but I know I could go to them and get insurance, right? And it would still be within reason for buying a property. Lastly, does it pass my Blink? How many of you guys have read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell? If you haven't read it, put it on your reading list. It's a great book. Your Blink is that thing that is your subconscious, which is constantly processing data, processing everything around you, right? Like when I started talking tonight, somebody in here went, this guy is a jerk, right? That's your Blink, right? It was James, no doubt, but right? That's your Blink. Your brain has actually scientifically processed more information than your conscious is able to take in, and it's making a decision, and it's letting you know. It's like James and I, the example I use is James and I drove up to a property in Evans where I already owned a property on the same street. It's multifamily, and we drove down the street. It's literally 4 or 5 properties away. I mean, it's the same street, right? The street doesn't change. It's not like you drive from like the nice side of Chicago to the south side or something like that, right? I don't even know if the south side is bad. Yeah, so there's places in Seattle where you walk a block and it totally changes. But it's not like that. It's the same. It looks the same. We pull into the like parking lot of the property and like we didn't even get out of the car and we were both like, this is a pass. We're not buying it, right? Because there was something wrong. Our brains had gone, and it was at the same time too. It was really weird. It was like, yeah, this is not a good property. And we still went in and looked at it, and just the whole time it was like, you can't even understand what that feeling is. Don't ignore that feeling, right? Trust your Blink.
The other way to describe it is if you don't really want the property, if there's something that's hesitating, that's causing you to hesitate, that's probably a sign.
Yeah. Another way that I like to think about that one, if I'm not sure, like, is I think, okay, you know, tomorrow I wake up and someone else has bought this property. Am I upset, right, or not? And if I'm not, maybe I don't want the property. It's that same thing where, you know, your kid can't decide something, but you know they really know what they want to do. And you're like, let's flip a coin. And you're like, heads it's this, tails it's this, and you flip it, and inevitably the coin comes up for the thing they don't really want to do. And then you're like, you want me to go 2 out of 3? And they're like, yeah, right? That's the same kind of concept. So those are my criterias. Any questions? Perfect. You guys are all soaking it in, I guess. So next step, we've got our criteria. Let's go find a property. How do we find them? Your agent, James, will send you emails with properties that meet your criteria. You tell them what you want. They show up every day or as often as immediately as they are listed, right? And in this market, I would highly suggest that. If your criteria is narrow enough, property gets listed, what do you want to do? You want to know as soon as possible. And as soon as you get that email, if you look at it and analyze it, what should you do if you like it? You should call James, right? Like, James, what is the fastest amount of time from an email coming to me and me calling you when I'm interested?
It's pretty quick.
Like an hour?
Oh, no, like within minutes.
Minutes? Man, I bet it's faster than that.
Probably is. The challenge is I'm not always looking at the email. Sometimes you
Yes.
see it before I do. You call me, you're like, "See that property just got?" I'm like, "Nope."
Yeah. So I know before him, even though the email's automatically sent. So you can go use my site with Iris, and James can set all that up. You can save your favorite properties. You can manage lists. It's a nice app. Go look at the listings, and if it meets your criteria, use that spreadsheet. Run the numbers, right? If the numbers meet your criteria, what are we going to do? Call him and go see the property. Are we going to wait a day? No. Are we going to go as soon as possible? Absolutely, especially in this market. In a different market, 2012 market, 2013 market, I could call James and I had a list of like 40 properties that I'd be like, I'd like to see these might be good. And I'd call him and be like, hey, let's go see 6 of them today. And we'd go see them, and it wasn't the same market. The market conditions now, you see something you want, you've got to go see it. ColoProperty.com is the public version of what James is seeing. So if you're using Zillow or Redfin or any of the other apps, you might notice they're not updated very rapidly. ColoProperty.com, you want to know if something's under contract? If it's marked in IRES, which is what James uses, it's going to be marked on ColoProperty.com. Check there, right? There's a lot of times where it's like, hey, I saw this property online, I looked at Zillow, it says it's for sale, yet it's been under contract for 3 weeks. So don't bother. Open houses. How many of you like to go to open houses? I like to go to open houses. Looking at houses is fun. That's my passion, right? I like real estate. So what are open houses for? Why do people hold open houses? Yeah.
Well, I've been to a lot of them in the last year, and I'm convinced that it's to get clients.
Yes. That is exactly what it's for. My dad held God knows how many thousands of open houses that I had to go sit with him and like play my little football game for 3 hours while he held an open house. Why is he there? He doesn't care about selling the property. I mean, he does, but he's there to get clients. He's there to get people that walk in off the street who are kind of ready to looking to buy a house, and he's going to say, hey, I can help you buy that house. This house isn't for you. That's okay. Let's go look at some other houses. That's what open houses are for. Many sellers do not believe this. Many sellers think the more open houses you hold, the faster my house will sell. And in only one example have I seen this work, and they like open house it to the max. Every Saturday all day long, every Sunday all day long, banners and streamers on the main road with huge flags and balloons. Like, you had to go see it because you were like, what's all the fuss about, right? So eventually somebody walked in and was like, I just came because I saw balloons, but I really like this house and I'm going to buy it. And they sold it in like 3 weeks, which it was overpriced, so probably shouldn't have sold. So just remember who their agent is actually working for. It's not you. You should already have your own agent. At the showing, what are you going to do? You found a property you liked, you analyzed it, it looked good, you called James, you went and saw the property, and that's where we're at. So look at everything from your eyes of your tenants, right? If you're nomading, yes, you're going to live there for a year, but it's only a year. It may not be perfect for you, but will it be a great majority rental for the majority of people, right? You're looking to satisfy 80 to 90% of what people are looking for. Flooring, paint, layout, appliances, and which ones, right? Note down which appliances are there when you see the showing so that if you do write a contract, you can make sure it's the same ones that are there when you close. If you just say the refrigerator, you may get a totally different fridge when you close. Most people don't do that, but it does happen. What do the bathrooms look like? What are the size of the bedrooms, right? How many times you walk into a bedroom and you're just like, man, touch the walls, I'm like, this is a jail cell. This is not a bedroom. This is a jail cell, right? Is your tenant going to walk in and think, this is such a giant bedroom? No. They're going to be like, this is the smallest bedroom I've ever been in. Are there bars on the door, right? Are there storage areas? Whether it's a basement. People have a lot of junk, right? They need a basement. They need a third car tandem garage. They need somewhere to store all their junk. What's the furnace? How old? What's the water heater? How old? Are you going to need to replace these things soon, right? A furnace could cost you $3,000. A water heater could cost you $1,000, right? Is your yard fenced? Why do we want fenced yards? People have pets. They want to have their pets. They don't want to have to like put a leash, right, and like walk their dog in their own backyard. That's silly, right? And we all know that people's animals aren't trained as well as they think they are, so they're not just sticking around. What does the roof look like from the ground, right? This is a tough one. You're going to have an inspector get up there and look at it later. How about the paint, the siding? You know, if you walk up and you start just using your fingernail on the boards and you can kind of really push in, you probably have some wood rot, right? Take a look at these things. How's the landscaping? Are you going to have to re-landscape it? Is the whole backyard dead? Is the front yard weeds? What's the crawl space look like? How about the eaves and the gutters, right? If that ice is like here in the middle of winter hanging over those gutters, you might have an ice damming problem. Is this something that the majority of people, like I said, would be attracted to, right? There are some people that are looking to live in like the dome house from Lord of the Rings. What is that movie? Lord of the Rings. A little hobbit house, right? Yeah. Or for those of you who have kids that know what Teletubbies are, that little dome house that Teletubbies live in, some people are looking to live in that. Most people are not, right? Most people do not want to live in that house. They want to live in a normal, average house. How updated is it, and what is it going to cost you if you need to update it in the near future? How's the curb appeal? So James and I, when we look at a house, we'll go inside, we'll look at it, and if we're interested at all, we'll usually walk out and we'll just start walking down the street, and we'll kind of look back. We'll look down this street, this street, this street, and then we'll kind of walk back by to see kind of, if I was just somebody walking by, what does this house look like? What's the curb appeal? Is it attractive? What do I need to do to make it attractive? We'll get to the other end of the block. We'll kind of look all three directions, right? Why are we doing this? We want to know what's around it, right? And then we drive the neighborhood, either before or after the showing, to see, you know, is there a trash dump a block that way, right? Will that impact anybody? Is there a hog farm or a manure farm somewhere that's close? Things to look for when you're walking and driving the neighborhood. Do most people care for their houses, right? Are their yards kept up? There's always that one house in every neighborhood whose yard's like a foot tall and full of weeds. You might try to go buy that house because it might be a rental and the landlord might not be taking care of it. That's one way to go buy houses. Are there broken down cars, right? And one of my favorites, are there people just standing around? You might be like, Brian, come on. They're just standing around? Yes. If you get out, and this was in Evans, James and I went, we got out, and it was the middle of the day. Like, people should be at work. It was like 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We got out, and there are multiple sets of people, like all around us, just, they're not doing anything. They were standing there when we pulled in, and they're still standing there. And what are they doing? They're watching you. Like, that's their, like, job. So what are they really doing? Somebody guess. They're probably dealing drugs. Come on. Right? I don't know what they're doing, but they don't have a job, and they're just standing around, and it was actually almost uncomfortable, right? It's not like, and if you were doing a showing with a tenant, that's a big sign, right? Like, your tenant's going to feel the same way you feel when you're just kind of walking in.
They have jobs, by the way. They're drug dealers.
Yes. True. How's the neighborhood? We talked about it. Drive around the neighborhood. Don't just drive to the showing and then go home. Go drive the neighborhood. Whether or not James is with you, go drive around it. Write stuff down during your showing that needs repair, right? And this is an example. A lot of people are like, I don't know how to estimate this stuff, but you get really good at it really quick. How much does a water heater cost? $1,000. How much does a furnace cost? $3,000. How much is a general roof? I don't know, 8 to 10K, right? These are all simple things you can go look up. So if you look at the kitchen and you're like, man, this vinyl is all shredded and torn up, just approximate, hey, it's a 12 by 12 room or whatever you think it is, write it down, 12 by 12, it needs new vinyl. Perfect, I can go estimate that later. I can call a flooring company and say, how much does it cost to replace 12 by 12 vinyl in a kitchen? $1,300. Okay, excellent, I got a number. New bathroom shower, right, is needed. Broken bathroom window. Like, you can go call afterwards and find out how much of this is gonna actually cost. Estimate them later and actually, right, consider using these for negotiations. And James can help you with the negotiations, right? In this market, it's hard to ask for the little tic-tac stuff, right? It's, you know, if there's something really major wrong with the house, you may need to negotiate on that. But if you come back with a list of like 40 things that are all like, nail hole in this wall needs to be filled, right? They're probably throwing your offer in the trash. And here's the note. the reason I'm telling you to write this stuff down is after you've seen 6 properties in a day, right, if that happens, or 6 properties across a week or a month, you're going to start forgetting which property had which floor in which room, and it's tough. So write it down. Still at the showing, ask James. James, what do you think this property rents for?
I have a new update on that.
Ooh.
The service.
Oh, yeah.
So we subscribe to a service now where I can pull rent comps for clients.
Why don't you tell him more so I can get water?
All right. So if you're interested in a property and you want to know rents, I'm notoriously low. So we actually got a service where we pull rent comps. I don't know where it is. But basically, you tell us, we can send you over like a 3-page PDF that has all the different rent comps with the number of bedrooms, square footage, and stuff like that. So. Okay. Yeah, it's somewhere. But we provide that as PDF. So if you tell me the address and bedrooms, email me or Tammy, we can get it here. And that's a service we paid for clients. So.
And we spot checked it on several properties that we actually know what the rent is, and we're very familiar with the neighborhoods, properties that I own, and it seems to be pretty reasonable. So that's one way. But James is still probably going to have an opinion, right? Just using the data and saying, oh, it's $17.95, right? Also go to Craigslist, right? Go pull up the square mile that property is in. Look for other properties for rent in that area, which is what this tool is going to do, but you may see things the tool doesn't have. See which properties are similar and estimate what you think rent range is. And this is really where, James is using the tool, but James also has his own data on rent, and he's also seen thousands and thousands of properties over time and with time, so he's got a really good idea of what things tend to rent for. So in that case, using him versus using someone else is a really big win for you. Always be super careful of who's at the showing besides yourself. There's a couple things, right? Sometimes you'll be at a showing with other people looking to buy the property. In that case, you just want to be like, it's a $300,000 house. Yeah, let's put an offer in for $375, right? You just want to scare them off. I'm kidding.
They don't like it when you do that, by the way, the other agents.
I have totally done that at least once. But you don't want to do that, but you want to be aware that if you're like, hey, this is a really nice property, like we need to make an offer now, right? You're giving away part of your hand. So don't tip anybody off. And the other thing is, if the seller or the seller's agent there, right, walk around, ask them all the questions you want that are appropriate, but then don't talk about your own position, whether you like it, whether you don't like it. It's really save that for later. If tenants are there, man, we ask tenants all sorts of questions. How long have you been here? Do you like it here? Is it quiet at night, right? Is anything broken? Have they done a good job of taking care of you, right? Like anything you want to ask the tenant to find out, hey, how does this, have you been here 7 years? That's an indication that they like the area, right? Is it noisy? Do you have any problems? Have the police ever been here or around here, right? You can ask the tenants. Some tenants will not tell you anything, and other tenants will tell you absolutely everything. I moved in a year and a half ago, and that air conditioner has not been fixed. I've sent them 8 emails, and they never respond, and you just get the whole story. One of the other things is that, and I'm not sure that many agents are doing this, but it is very simple to place a listening device with a camera in the unit and hear everything you say, even if no one else is around. So if you're in there and you're like, hey, I think we could get this for $325, let's start at $320 or $318, and hopefully they'll accept that, and they have that device, guess what they're doing? They're holding out for $325 because they know you're going there. So just be aware that even when you think people aren't listening, they could actually be listening.
The rule of thumb is don't say anything in the house that you wouldn't say right in front of the seller. If you want to have a private conversation with me afterward, let's do it outside by the car.
Yep. So, these are the questions. Whatever you want to ask, feel free to ask, but ask questions. And like I said before, your blink's important here, right? You're inside the house. What was your blink when you drove up? What's your blink inside the house? What's your blink with the tenant? That all matters. So, you've seen the property. Now we need to really kind of go in depth on the analysis. We're going to go run rent comps, which is what I just talked about. 1 mile radius. Why do we do a 1 mile radius? For comps, for rent. Yeah. So I can't compare, Loveland Old Town rental to a Fort Collins Old Town rental. They're not the same thing. Even if the house was exactly the same, it would rent for different amounts. More people probably want to live in Old Town Fort Collins than Old Town Loveland. Old Town Loveland's still great, but that's just the way people are. So go look at that square mile, pull up the properties, see which ones are similar, and see what they're actually renting for. Use James's piece of paper or PDF that he's going to send you that shows all the properties that have been renting in that area as well. And that one goes back in time, which is kind of nice. It doesn't just show what's currently available. It's like, here's what we actually saw back in time. And I don't know how far it goes. Is it like a year?
I think you can.
You can adjust it. Yeah, so that could be super interesting too, right? Especially if the same house is on there multiple times, you can kind of see, oh, it used to be 1550, now it's 1650, now it's 1695. That's super interesting. What kind of tenants is your property going to attract? Does your property look run down? Does it feel run down? Is it attracting good tenants or bad tenants? Are you going to want to own it? Same question, right? Analyzing it again, go back to your criteria. Do I really want to own that? I've been inside now. Will you be happy with it in your portfolio? And then take all that stuff, right? You've written down what it's going to cost to do repairs. You've called an insurance person. You've got an insurance quote. All right? You know what it's going to cost to run this house. Plug it all into the spreadsheet and estimate conservatively for stuff you aren't sure of, right? Don't be like, I can totally get that for $100. I'll get a new water heater for $100. Just be conservative, right? It's like, play with the numbers you're not sure about, right? So if you think rent is somewhere between $16.95 and $18.95, or even $19.50, which you might be like, geez, Brian, that's $250 range. That's legitimate for a range on a property. I have a property in Windsor that I rented for over $1,900, and this year other people got $16.95 or $17.95. That's a big swing, right? So run that analysis and look at the comparison between high and low of what you think rent could actually be. You know, and if $1,600 is good, what's it look like at $1,400? If $1,400 is good, what's it look like at $1,200? Give yourself some knowledge and play with that spreadsheet and the numbers so that you really internalize, hey, I know what it's going to look like in the case that I expect. I know it definitely looks better if it goes better than that, but in the case where it doesn't go as well as I expect, I'm still going to be okay. The last thing you want to do is buy a property, not get the rent that you expected, and lose the house because of it.
This is one of the most challenging parts of being a real estate investor is, you know, if you're off by $200 on a rental, sometimes that means the difference between positive cash flow and completely negative cash flow. And you really could be off by that much. The market is not an exact number, especially
It is not.
rent.
Yep.
So, you know, your ability to go ahead and market in advance, do a really good job getting maximum exposure, and selling the benefits of your property is going to be one of the things that impacts where you are in that range.
Yeah, and it's an upcoming class that I'm sure isn't that far off, which is about how to go about marketing your property and screening for tenants. One of the big things is start well in advance, right? A lot of people are like, hey, you know, I just got 30 days notice from my tenant. I'm going to start advertising it. That's way too late, right? 90 days, 60 days at the minimum. That way you can advertise at $17.95, get no phone calls and know, okay, I'm too high. $17.50, I got a week, no phone calls. $1,700, oh, hey, I started getting phone calls and maybe the applicants are all terrible. $1,650, I'm getting the right phone calls, people are qualified, I'm taking applications, I'm processing them, and I'm putting a tenant in there, right? That's how you want to do it. You don't want to just, hey, I think it's going to be $1,600, so I advertise at that. You could be leaving a lot of money on the table.
And to be clear, the class is coming up, but we have videos of pretty much
Oh,
every class at this point, so clients get access to all the classes for the last year or two.
Yep. Determine if it meets your criteria for cash on cash, right? And overall return. If it does, great. What's the opportunity cost, right? So now you're like, yes, it meets all my criteria. Now think about what else could you do with the money you're about to spend, right? Do your gut check. What does your blink say? Could I actually go and take this and invest in something else and do better? If so, you got to have that debate with yourself. Decide if you want to make an offer, which if you don't think the opportunity cost is high, you think it's low opportunity cost, you should probably be making an offer, especially in our market. So, what are we going to do? We're going to make an offer. What do we do when we make an offer? Take action. This is like the most important 2 words on the entire slide deck. Take action. In everything you do in real estate, take action. Don't spend time doing stuff that doesn't get you closer to buying a house, right? Get your financial house in order. Does that get you closer to buying a house? Absolutely. Do that, but take action. Even if you are like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. You know, it's a lot of money. You know, I can't do it. I will tell you that when I bought my condo, which was my first property, I was in literally tears because I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. Grown man crying because he's worried about what if it doesn't work out? And I had plenty of backup funds, right? But James is laughing. No joke, right? Because I was like, and that's part of my passion, right? But I was like, man, if it doesn't work out. And thankfully, you know, it was like, nope, go do it, right? And so I stayed the course, and it worked out wonderfully.
To be fair, Brian cries during commercials.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. Yeah. James doesn't know what emotions are. He doesn't cry at all. So don't lose it to someone else because you spent an extra day hesitating about whether or not you should buy it, right? Put it under contract, and if you change your mind, right, hopefully you can get out of the contract with a contingency with good faith, right? We can talk about that completely in a different class.
There is no I changed my mind.
Yes, there is no I changed my mind. So you want to make sure, but it's going to be uncomfortable, right? If you've never bought a rental property, right, where's your comfort zone? Here's your normal comfort zone. Right here. Anything in here feels normal. You know, for James, eating lunch at Qdoba, right there, right? Every day, right? You know, having salad for dinner, every day, right? Inside his comfort zone, right? If he had never bought a property, right, that's like out here, maybe even further. But once he goes through that process, what happens? His comfort zone expands. Now this part becomes comfortable, right? And depending on the person, it can become, you know, very comfortable very fast. You're like, hey, that went really well. I'm going to buy another one. And then you're just going to go, and you're going to go. Use your contract to handle the risk, right? You've got contingencies in place. If you can't get insurance, you can cancel. If you can't get your loan, you can cancel, right? And still get your earnest money back. There are contingencies there to protect you, and James will go through all that with you when you review the contract. This is what's crazy, is literally waiting a few days in our market is you're going to miss the offer, but it could actually be a few hours, right? Those hours where you see it come across and you don't go see the property, you might miss. One example of this is the property that I bought a year and a day ago, where we got the thing and started writing the offer while I was teaching class. I wanted to go see the property, and they were like, we're not doing showings till like next week or some craziness. And I was like, well, I'm not waiting that long. Just write the offer, sight unseen. We'll just do it.
They had an offer in hand.
Oh, yes. They had an offer from their property manager in hand as well. And they were going to accept it. And I was like, what's it for? I'll beat it. And so they told us what it was for, and I beat it, right? I was like, I'll give you $25,000 more. And so James is laughing for a really evil story, which we'll get to in a second. But what happened was there were lots of people calling this guy, right? But I had the advantage. I had James as my agent, right? And I was experienced enough to be like, I'm not hesitating. I've bought a property sight unseen before. I'm happy to do it again. I know the contract protects me. If I need to back out on inspection, I totally can. If I walk in, it's not what they say it is. Great, we're going to negotiate. But they were like, hey, we found a time to get a showing. It was like 2 o'clock the next day, and there were like 19 people that were going to come to this showing to see one unit in this building, right? What happens once those 19 people have seen that building? The price goes up a lot. It was under contract before noon, signed and done. They canceled all the showings. The only people that saw were us. Couple hours would have made all the difference. If I don't start writing the contract or tell Tammy and James, hey, let's move. If we don't do that till noon the next day, I may not own that property right now. So, you gotta take action. Making an offer. What is James gonna need from you? Really quickly. Which property you wanna buy? That should be obvious. Full legal names as you want it to appear on the deed. Offer price, down payment amount, how much are you gonna put down? What type of financing are you getting? Seller concession amount, if any. Are you asking for seller concessions back? in our market, if you're buying a property for $300,000 and you want $4,000 in seller concessions to pay for your closing costs so you can finance them in, you're probably offering $304 and asking for $4 back, so the seller still nets the same amount. Date of closing, when do you want to close? What contingencies do you want? How long do you want to give the seller to respond? This is a really tricky one. In that previous example, it was like, I think we gave them till noon that day or something. We're like, if it's not signed, we're done. And by the way, the other bad part of this story is when James called me to tell me they accepted the offer, I was in the bank. So I don't know, I was depositing a check or something. He calls me and like straight-faced, he's like, so the seller, the property manager matched your offer. They said they'd accept yours if you offer $25K more. I don't know what it was. My response was, fine.
What did I tell you?
I don't remember.
I think I told you I just made $50,000.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what you said.
They accepted your offer.
Yeah. I was not amused at the time. Yeah, I was not amused at all. Your pre-approval or your actual approval letter for your lender, and anything else that you think belongs in the contract, right? Like if you're doing a 1031 exchange from selling another property and you're buying it with this, that needs to be in there. Anything else that you may want, hey, I want to make sure that, you know, it's this fridge or the washer and dryer stay or whatever, right? That's all pertinent information. A personal letter from you to the seller if desired. In some cases, James will write letters for clients, but typically he has to have done business with you for quite a while to be able to write a really amazing letter, right? Otherwise, if it's your first house, it's not like you can say, well, they've bought 6 houses with me before and they've always closed on time, blah, 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 blah. He has a hard time saying that because it's not true yet. So there are people in Denver writing songs and singing them and recording videos to sellers so that they will get the offer accepted because there's so many offers, right? It's craziness.
Just so you know, the attorney we use discourages that. He says it might be a violation of fair housing.
Well, I think it's okay if you're on the buyer's side, but on the seller's side, a lot of agents will say, we're going to discard them, no one's going to see these.
So the argument from the attorney, as I heard it, now that we're having a discussion across the classroom, is that if the seller accepts your offer because of your letter, and it turns out it's a fair housing violation, another buyer can actually sue, hold up the sale, and have some real problems with the transaction.
That is possible, but I mean, it's still a potential tool in your tool bag as a buyer, depending on what you're saying.
Yeah, so touch up on your songwriting skills. Bet you never thought you'd hear that tonight. James is going to write it up, review it with you, and then you're going to sign it digitally in most cases, and then it gets sent over to the seller for presentation. So one of the things that's important about your agent is when that contract gets sent over, it doesn't just get sent over and like, hey, here's your offer, right? James is going to make a phone call, explain the offer, talk you up as a buyer, and try and understand, hey, do you have other offers? If so, can you give me information on those? And let him know if it's okay with you, hey, if you have an offer that comes in higher, call us back, right? Countless times I've gotten offers because of that. Right? James calls, finds out there's another offer. It's, you know, the same amount as mine. And I'm like, what are they, you know, is 5K more enough to do it? Right? The last thing you want to miss out on in most cases is buying a, you know, $350,000 house and that you really want. And if you would have paid $354, you would have gotten it. Right? And instead you were like, no, I'll just pass.
And 5K is $25 a month. So if you pay $5,000 more, you need to make $25 more a month in rent in order to cover that.
Yeah. And so I'll tell you another little story. I put an offer in on a fourplex over by Adora Park. So every time I hear Adora Park, if you see me shudder, it's because it still brings back bad memories. I could have bought the fourplex for like, I don't even know what it was, $450 or something. And so like my final, like my high offer was like $10K off. The property next door, like a year later, sold for $800. Yep. Guess what never happened after that? The next time that came up and there were other offers on a similar building, I was just like, knock it out of the park. It's still a good deal. And it still has to work, right? You can't just be like, I'm going to pay $50K more for this and not have it work numbers-wise. But if it works numbers-wise, you got to do it.
This is why me telling you that they asked for $50K more, you were like, yes.
Right.
Let's just do it. And I was like, sweet.
Well, it's because I knew yeah, in this particular case, I knew that the building was still worth $100K more than what I was paying for it. So it was like, even if they would have said $150, I probably would have said yes. So Making an offer, earnest money deadline, right? Typically, you're going to use the alternative earnest money deadline, which allows you like 3 days to actually get your money since you're not submitting a check with the offer because the offer is usually submitted digitally. Seller concessions, we talked about using that to finance your closing costs. The acceptance deadline, how much time are you giving your seller to respond? And what if it's signed after the deadline? Is it in force? You give them till noon and they sign it at 2:30? James, what are you going to do to protect your client?
I'm going to have them initial it, or we're going to do an immediate amend extend to extend the deadline.
In most cases, most agents would just be like, I'm going to let it go, and we're going to act like it's in effect, and most of the time, 99.999%, it'll close. But that one time it doesn't, and it's you're going to be pissed. Protect yourself. MEC, who knows what MEC stands for in a contract? Yes. Do you use MEC? So if you submit an offer and you give them 3 days to accept, do you use an MEC plus 7 days, or do you just put a fixed date in your contract? Right? This is a decision for you to make. Most of the time we use MEC plus, except for closing. Yeah, Gretchen.
We didn't hear what MEC stands
Mutually executed contract. Basically, both parties have executed the contract. It's now legally in force. Other disclosures are going to be included, all sorts of stuff. Square footage, lead-based paint, water, occupancy limit if it's in Fort Collins. If it's tenant occupied, right, you're probably going to ask for some additional information from the seller. I want to see a copy of the lease, especially if you're leaving the tenant in there and they're not going to be out. And there's an income residential version of the contract that James can choose to use if it is necessary. New construction. If you're buying new construction, it's probably not the contract that James is going to teach you. It's probably the really non-buyer friendly, sellers friendly contract because it's a builder. They want it to go their way. And almost all of these, one of the important things you need to know is they have a PETA clause. Who knows what PETA clause is? It is not delicious animals. That is an E, not an I. This is the pain in the ass clause, right? Almost every builder has this. And this is actually what one of them says. If prior to closing, seller determines in seller's sole and absolute discretion, it's seller's choice. You don't get to say. That seller is unable to work cooperatively with buyer, seller shall have the unconditional right to terminate this agreement by paying $1,000 and returning your earnest money. If you piss the builder off, here's a check for $1,000, have a nice day. Nothing you can do about it. Imagine if this is your dream home. That's rough. I've had a builder a long time ago try to enforce that on me, except they didn't have it in their contract. Their loss. Oh man, it is a long story that we do not have time for. Essentially, their representative lied to the actual builder, the person who shows all the model homes. She lied, like she promised something, and then she lied about the situation, and so the builders were like, you know, you're pressuring her to do, and I'm like, she promised that she would do this, and she's not following through. This was part of the agreement when we even sat down with you to sign the contract, and so things got out of hand, and they were like, we don't want you to buy the house, and I was like, too bad. So we bought the house. Discuss counteroffers, right? When counteroffers come back, what are you going to do? How might you counter? How do you strengthen your offer? Offer more money, right? You've heard me talk about that one. We talked about having James call their agent and basically understand as much information as possible. What's the seller looking for? Hey, I'm moving to Florida. I need to be out of here in 30 days. Fantastic. We can close in 30 days. 29 if you want, right? What do they want? Waive your inspection. Does that sound like fun? You can still inspect the property. You just can't object and cancel the contract based on it. So, if you're comfortable doing that, great. It will definitely strengthen your offer, right? I know you're not going to come in here and try and inspect it and then ask me for a bunch of stuff. Waive the appraisal. This one starts to get really dicey, right? If your appraisal doesn't come in, what does that mean? It means you're coming to the closing table with extra cash. How much extra cash? However much is needed, right? You can obviously try to renegotiate, but if you've waived your appraisal, it's pretty tough. You can waive your loan objection. This one to me is a little safer than waiving the appraisal if you're confident and you've already been underwritten and know you can get the loan for the property. Higher earnest money. A lot of people think this matters. I don't think it does. I don't think James thinks it matters, because most of the time, if you cancel the contract, you usually get your earnest money back. It's so rare that somebody's actually going to fight you for $3,000. And if you really put $5,000, does it make that much more of a difference? Like, the only thing earnest money is doing is saying, I'm committing to do this, and if I default, then you can have my earnest money. So $3,000 or $5,000 for somebody selling a $350,000 house, do they care that it's $2,000 more? I don't think so. However, I almost missed it. If you get into a dispute and you put more earnest money down and it was like all of the kind of active money you had, this could take you out of the market until you are actually able to get that earnest money back. So that could be crazy.
It's more likely to happen with like first-time home buyers who are really tight. They come in, they put in, you know, $3,000, and it's a significant portion of the down payment that they're coming up with.
Yep.
And if there's an earnest money dispute because they weren't playing fairly, then that could really delay things for them.
Yep. So your offer's accepted. Congrats. What do? We get to work. Start by sending your fully executed contract to your lender. They're going to need it. We go have an inspection. We schedule an inspection before the deadline. The inspector goes out, inspects everything. You should go with the inspector. You should ask him lots of questions. When he says, oh, this doesn't look right, you should find out why. He's going to give you a report, but if you stand there and have a conversation with him about it, you're going to remember it much better. Take notes. And if you see things that don't appear right, point them out. Don't think he's the be-all, end-all expert. The home that I own that's really old, when I walked through it with the inspector, I found the thing in the house that he was like, this is the second strangest thing I've ever seen. The first one was a light switch to turn on the oven. I was like, I can't beat that. But this one, I'm looking at the furnace, and there's like vents, and I'm putting my hand by the vent, and it feels like it's like not blowing air. It's clearly on, but it kind of feels like it's sucking air. And I walk over to the air intake, and it's blowing air. I'm like, I think the furnace is backwards. And he went and looked, and sure enough, they put the furnace in backwards. They needed a different kind of furnace. So it's blowing air only out of one vent and sucking it in through all the other vents. He's like, this is the second weirdest thing I've ever seen. So remember, general maintenance and things that needs to be fixed are different. When I sold my first house, it was a young Russian couple buying their first house, and they went around to the inspector, and the inspector would be like, well, that needs to be painted every 5 to 7 years. And so everything that he said like that, because he was explaining first-time home buyer, everything he said showed up on the inspection objection. And I was like, no, I'm not painting the house for you unless you want to pay a lot more. You can go test for radon, mold, asbestos, meth, whatever you want, but it's going to cost you more. It's typically not done inside the same inspection. Sewer line is probably the one, if you're buying an older house, that I would recommend to make sure that your sewer line, which could be a very big expense, like $7 to $10K or more. You get a report emailed to you. If you want to object based on any of that, you can object. Say, hey, in order for me to buy the house, I need you to remedy these 3 conditions. It's really for major things you didn't see during the showing. And this is a good faith kind of thing. If you walk up and there's a hole in the roof and you see it when you do the showing and you make an offer and then at objection time, you're like, well, there's a hole in the roof. Like a meteor went through it. They're like, you saw it at the showing, right? Everyone saw that, right? Don't object based on stuff that you've already seen. You should make your offer based on that. You can ask for whatever you want. Seller can either accept, counter, or do nothing. If they do nothing and we pass the inspection resolution deadline, the contract is null and void. You need to withdraw your inspection objection, otherwise it would go to be canceled. Everything I just said. Sign the inspection resolution if you agree to make any changes. Other deadlines, you're going to get a prelim title commitment from the title company. James can tell you a little bit about it, so can Tammy, but you're going to have to call an attorney if you have in-depth questions about this, especially if it's related to gas, oil, mineral rights, and things of that nature. What does this show you? It shows you the chain of title for the property. You can see who bought it, who sold it, when it happened, right? It shows you also all of the old filings with the county that have ever happened for this property, so whether it's HOAs or a train track used to own this property and they still have an easement for this part of the property. You can see all of that stuff on there. If anything changes at all, you'll get a new copy. Sometimes you won't even know what changed. It's super annoying. And Tammy, I think, asked last, what is actually different?
Different title companies do different, like some of them underline stuff.
Yeah.
Stay at the top, which I would prefer actually.
Yeah.
Add an exception or something.
Yeah, it's crazy. HOA docs, you're going to get a bunch of those. You get to review them. Please read your HOA docs. If you're going to do an Airbnb with a rental you're buying, and the HOA says you cannot have any rentals for less than 30 days, you can't really Airbnb that. Don't do it. Got to read it. Read it for pets, read it for what you can have there, find out the dues, all that stuff. Seller's property disclosure. This protects the seller. You actually want them to fill it out so that you know more about the property. If you can have that before you go do your inspection, even better. That way you can say, hey, they said that there was a leak in the bathroom 2 years ago, they fixed it. Can you double check, right, to your inspector? Final walkthrough. We're about to go to closing. You're going to go walk the property one last time. Why? Because you're about to spend a bunch of money. We want to make sure it's exactly what you thought you were buying. Pretty much, James likes to do this about an hour before you actually go to closing. So you drive from the property to closing and then sign your docs, and then you know exactly what you're getting. Make sure the condition's the same. Are all the appliances, anything you agreed upon in the contract, still there? Is anything broken or damaged that wasn't before? And what are you going to do about it if it is? Closing. Transfer the utilities. You should do this before you go to closing. You know you're going to closing. Call the utility companies. That is your day. You own utilities on the day of closing. So make sure you've already transferred them. If you call in the middle of the day, they will not be able to transfer them until at least the next day. Make sure your insurance coverage is going to start. They will make sure of this if you have a lender, because without that, you can't close. What you're going to bring to closing? Money, either cashier's check or wire. You're really not bringing a suitcase of cash. They're not going to accept that in most cases. Picture ID and one other form of identification. And anyone else who needs to sign, you need to bring them too. Don't leave them at home. Seller might be there. If you had a really rocky relationship with your seller, you can request a different signing time so you don't have to be in the same room with them. If I had time for another story, I'd tell you a really good one, but I'll skip it. Sign your documents. Read and ask questions as much as you want. You can get a copy of the documents you're going to sign ahead of closing. If you're the type of person that wants to sit down and read this fat, thick of stick, whatever it is, fat, thick stack of paper, it's like a tongue twister, and you're going to read every word and ask questions, get it ahead of time, or your closing is going to take hours, right? And if you have an objection to something in the documents, how likely is it that Fannie Mae is going to change that for you? 0, right? So read them. They're all kind of the same. Note, deed of trust, and the closing disclosure are the most important. The note in the deed of trust is basically, hey, this is what you're agreeing to pay. The deed of trust gets filed to the county that says, hey, there's a lien on the property. The closing disclosure has all the information about your loan as well. Seller signs the deed, typically a warranty deed, and that transfers ownership to you. And then you're done with closing. You walk out with keys. Are we happy? Yes, we just bought our first property. Yes, cheering is in order. After closing, they're going to file that deed electronically and they're going to mail it to you in the mail. If you don't get it, call title company back. You're also going to get your owner's title policy. These are now starting to come all digital. They used to mail them to you, super annoying. Then you had to scan them in, so you had a digital copy. Yeah. Ask them if you don't get it within 60 days. Take all the documents from closing and scan them in and file them in your filing system. We do a whole class on how to organize your documents. The longer you wait to do this, the bigger of a pain it becomes. If you close on 3 houses and you've got stacks of paper and now you have to scan them all, it's just time consuming. What are we doing right after closing? We have locks in our car and we're going back to the property and we're changing the locks. Or we're calling our property manager and we're having them change the locks. Why? Because we don't know if we have all the keys. They might have had a tenant in there who has 5 other keys. What else are we doing? Resetting the garage openers. That button that's up top on the actual opener, go push it, hold it, wait till it blinks. It resets all the codes that are out. Now you can reprogram the openers you have to open that door, but all the people that have cars with just a button they push in their car, they still have access to that garage. So every tenant that might have lived there, if they haven't reset their car thing, they can still get in the property. Most people don't think about that. Get the property rent ready. All the work that you decided you were going to do and all the maintenance, clean it. Get it all done, right? Still, change the locks. It's that important. I put it like 3 bullet points apart on 2 different slides. Have your furnace and AC serviced. I don't know when the last time it was serviced unless it was a part of the inspection objection or unless there's documentation from the seller. I want that thing to last. So I'm going to call the guy out there and spend the 99 bucks each or whatever it is to have that serviced. Check your smoke and CO detectors. Make sure usually they have a date on them. If they don't, you should probably replace them. If they look super old, you should probably replace them. But 10 years is usually the lifespan. These are...
White. If they're yellow, they're old.
Yep. Fix any items from the inspection report. So when I had an inspection done, I tend to look at that and I go back through with a fine-tooth comb and I go, what are the things I want to fix in here? Because I don't want tenant phone calls, right? Hey, this outlet doesn't work. Okay, I'm having that fixed, right? I call my handyman up and I just give him a list. Here's 30 things, go do all these things, let me know when they're done. That way, I've taken care of the majority of the calls and complaints I'm likely to get before a tenant ever sets foot in the house. I don't want a phone call from the tenant. Any other needed repairs, clean the unit, have the carpets cleaned, and then rent to an amazing tenant. How do we do that? We teach an entire 3-series class on how to rent to amazing tenants, how to screen them. But go review those classes if you have access to them online. I don't even know if we recorded the actual tenant screening class because it was a do the work. We did a workshop where you got to screen tenants. I brought sample tenants. You got to screen them on your own, which is a lot of fun. Advertise as early as possible. We kind of already talked about this. Do get permission from the seller if you're advertising before you buy it. I know from personal experience that they don't like it if you just post the pictures that they had on the listing. That was early on in my real estate career. Take the calls, pre-screen the tenants, do the showings, take the applications, screen your tenants thoroughly. This is the #1 most important thing you can do to protect your asset, right? If you put a tenant in there that is not a great tenant, you are going to pay the price. Sign your lease. Manage the property, see how these are this is at least one entire class, this is one entire class, maybe 2, right? Perform maintenance as it comes up, and then think about, hopefully you thought about this before, but think about what your exit strategy is if you have one, right? Most case, hopefully you're buying and holding for the long term, but hopefully you thought about this before you bought the house. Are you going to lease option this house and sell it in 2 to 5 years? Are you going to hold this for 20 years and then sell it? What are you going to do? And then what you really need to think about is if the market isn't cooperating with you, right, what are you going to do then? Oh, I'm going to sell this in 3 years. It's going to be worth $50K more, and then I'm going to do this again. But in 3 years, the market's down, and you can't sell it for more. You can only sell it for less. What now, right? Think about multiple exit strategies for all of your properties before you buy them. Here's some possibilities. You can sell it using an agent. You can sell it yourself for sale by owner. That's what FSBO is. Lease option it. Owner finance it to someone else. There's some serious regulations and legal stuff around owner financing, so if you're going to do that, come talk to us after class. Hold it forever and pass it to your heirs and make it their problem, right? Just die, right? Things successful investors do. So last slide of the night, going to finish right at 8 o'clock apparently. Take action. I already said that this is super important. I can't stress it enough. If you're not taking action and it's not action that's deliberate to get you to buy your first house or your first property, you're taking the wrong action. So this is the why, right, that drives you to take this action, right? Having money is not enough. Having time with my family is definitely enough. Hustle. I think hustle is super important, and it goes right in hand with the next one, but you've got to have hustle, right? When that email comes and it says, hey, there's a property available and it meets your criteria, get up, go see it. Don't wait, do it now. Have grit. I added this one since the last presentation because I think it's super important. This is basically, stuff's going to go wrong, right? Do you have the perseverance to just bear down and push through it? Are you willing to do that, right? Do you have the grit to resolve it and get through anything? And if you do, you're going to be super successful, right? Because stuff is not always going to go smoothly. Tenants are going to do damage to your property. People are going to reject your offers. That's okay. Keep going, right? You can do this. Make decisions and follow through. I'm going to buy my first house. Great. Go take action, have some hustle, get some grit, buy your first house. Follow through on that. Making them faster and faster and faster and faster starts to matter, especially in our market. You can't take that long to make a decision. And lastly, treat this as a business. Maybe for somebody in this room, it's a hobby, but this is a business. You should run it as a business, right? If you saw asset protection last night, it's all about running it as a business, protecting your assets so this can be a long-term, wealth-building, income-generating business for you. And that is all I have. Any questions? Donna.
I have a comment on the have grit. I'm glad you added that because I've been looking for a home for a year. And
Yep.
was
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why the why matters, right? If you didn't have a why of what you really wanted to do with real estate, if you were still looking after a year, most people will give up, right? And so when you look around the room and you go, who's being successful, who's been in this room a long time, who's learning, right, and who's out there taking action, you can tell, you know, that person has grit. They clearly had setbacks and downfalls. As an example, in the past week, I've been told I need to replace 3 water heaters. That's like $3,000 because they're bigger water heaters. A boiler went out, that's like 11 grand. I have a roof that's apparently in need of replacement that was totally unexpected, that's like 24 grand, right? Shit happens, right? It really does. And this just happens to all be all at once, which is fine because I've got reserves because I did it the right way, but it still sucks, right? And so it's like, okay, let's just get through this and get back to getting checks in the mail. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Darius, anyone who's new, came in late, and did not get copies of the newsletter, Allison's got them over there. And then if you trade your form for the books, we may actually be short on books, so I may need to collect your form and get you one next week. So make sure you go and get your books if you're going to do that. But thank you again for teaching the class. This is basically like the entire series in like one night. But there's a lot of detail that we still have yet to go over.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate you doing it. And I will buy him dinner on your behalf after class. So thank you, Brian.
No, it is not Qdoba.